You're at your wedding rehearsal, surrounded by everyone you love most in the world. Your fiancé looks perfect in his suit, your bridesmaids are giggling about tomorrow's big day, and everything feels like a fairy tale coming true. Then your mother walks up to your future husband, gives him the warmest hug, and whispers something in his ear that makes your blood run cold. Something that threatens to destroy not just your wedding, but your entire family. This is exactly what happened to me, and what came next changed everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss.
My name is Sophia Martinez, and 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life mapped out ahead of me. I was marrying Jackson Reed, the man of my dreams, in what was supposed to be the wedding of the century. At least that's what everyone kept telling me. Jackson and I had been together for 4 years, ever since we met at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, where I was working on my master's thesis in psychology, and he was reading legal briefs for his law firm. Jackson wasn't just handsome, though he definitely was that. Tall, athletic build from his weekend rock climbing adventures, warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most important person there. But what really drew me to him was his kindness. The way he'd remember the names of every barista at our regular coffee shop, how he'd stop to help elderly neighbors carry their groceries, the genuine interest he showed when I rambled on about my research into family dynamics and trauma responses. My family adored him from the moment I brought him home for Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. My dad, Roberto, who typically grilled every guy I dated like he was cross-examining a hostile witness, took to Jackson immediately. They bonded over their shared love of vintage cars and spent hours in our garage working on Dad's 1967 Mustang. My younger brother, Miguel, who was notoriously protective of his big sister, started inviting Jackson to his college basketball games and introducing him as his future brother-in-law. But it was my mother, Elena, who seemed most taken with Jackson. She'd light up whenever he walked into a room, always making sure his favorite foods were on the table when he came for dinner, asking about his work cases with genuine interest, and treating him like the son she never had. She'd often pull me aside to tell me how lucky I was, how Jackson was exactly the kind of man she'd always hoped I'd find. Then there was my sister, Isabel. Isabel was 2 years younger than me, but you'd never guess we were related if you saw us side by side. Where I was practical and driven, she was spontaneous and artistic. I had inherited Dad's dark hair and serious demeanor, while she got Mom's lighter features and infectious laugh. I was the one who studied hard, got good grades, and followed the path everyone expected. Isabel was the free spirit who dropped out of art school to travel Europe with nothing but a backpack and her painting supplies. Growing up, people always said Isabel was the prettier sister. It never bothered me much because we were so different that comparisons felt pointless. I found my confidence in achievements and stability. She found hers in creativity and adventure. We supported each other's dreams, even when we didn't understand them. When Isabel came back from Europe 6 months ago, she seemed different. More settled, more focused. She'd rented a small studio apartment in the Arts District and was actually making a living selling her paintings at local galleries. I was proud of her for finding her direction. And Jackson was genuinely interested in her work. He'd ask thoughtful questions about her techniques and even bought one of her pieces for our apartment. The three of us would sometimes hang out together, grabbing dinner or going to art exhibits. Isabel and Jackson got along great, which made me happy. I'd always wanted my family to love the person I chose to spend my life with, and it seemed like everything was falling perfectly into place. The wedding planning had been a whirlwind. Mom threw herself into it with the enthusiasm of someone planning a royal coronation. She insisted we use the same florist who did her sister's wedding, booked the most exclusive venue in the city, and somehow managed to get us a cake from a baker who typically had a 6-month waiting list. Dad joked that Mom was more excited about the wedding than I was, and honestly, he might have been right.
I was excited, don't get me wrong, but I was also focused on finishing my thesis and starting my new job at the family therapy clinic. Jackson was working on a major case that had him putting in 14-hour days. Between our careers and the constant wedding decisions, we were both feeling stretched thin. But every time we'd collapse on our couch after another long day of cake tastings and venue walkthroughs, Jackson would pull me close and remind me that in just a few weeks, all the chaos would be over and we'd be husband and wife. The rehearsal was scheduled for a Friday evening at St. Michael's Cathedral, the same church where my parents had gotten married 28 years earlier. Mom had been planning the rehearsal dinner for months, coordinating with the caterers, arranging flowers, and making sure every detail was perfect. She'd even hired a photographer to capture the evening, saying she wanted to remember every moment leading up to the big day. That Friday afternoon, I was at the salon with my bridesmaids getting our nails done, when Mom called. Her voice was unusually tense as she asked if I could come to the church an hour early to help with some last-minute details. Something about the florist being confused about the arrangements and needing my input. I thought it was odd, since Mom usually handled everything herself, but wedding planning stress makes people act in unexpected ways. I arrived at the church to find Mom arranging flowers at the altar, her movements quick and agitated. When she saw me, she forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes and launched into a detailed explanation about centerpiece placement that seemed far more complicated than necessary. I helped her adjust the arrangements, noticing that her hands were shaking slightly as she positioned each bloom. Jackson showed up about 30 minutes later with his groomsmen, looking relaxed and handsome in his navy suit. He'd gotten a haircut that afternoon, and his smile was radiant as he walked down the aisle toward me. This was it, I thought. Tomorrow we'd be doing this for real, in front of 200 guests, promising to love each other for the rest of our lives. The rehearsal itself went smoothly. Father McKenna walked us through the ceremony, explaining where everyone should stand, when the music would cue, and how the processional would work. Jackson's best friend, David, cracked jokes about Jackson's notorious inability to remember his lines, which had everyone laughing. My maid of honor, my college roommate Sarah, practiced her reading from Corinthians with dramatic flair that had even the priest smiling. As we wrapped up the formal run-through, people began mingling and chatting. The church had that warm, golden light that comes from late afternoon sun streaming through stained glass windows. Everyone seemed relaxed and happy, excited about tomorrow's celebration. Jackson was talking with my dad about their weekend fishing plans for after we got back from our honeymoon in Italy. That's when I saw Mom approaching Jackson from across the church. She had this expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. Determined, maybe, or nervous? She walked straight up to him while he was mid-conversation with Dad and two of his groomsmen. Mom reached Jackson just as Dad was telling a story about the first fish he had ever caught. She placed her hand gently on Jackson's arm, and he turned toward her with that genuine smile he always gave her. Dad and the groomsmen naturally stepped back to give them space, assuming she wanted a private moment with her future son-in-law. I watched from about 15 feet away, arranging programs on a table near the back pews, but I had a clear view of their interaction. Mom reached up and wrapped Jackson in one of her signature warm hugs. She was a hugger by nature, always had been, so this seemed completely normal. What wasn't normal was how long the embrace lasted, or the way Mom's expression shifted as she held him. When she pulled back slightly, she kept her hands on his shoulders and leaned in close to his ear. From where I stood, I could see her lips moving, but I couldn't make out the words. Jackson's entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face, and his eyes widened in what looked like shock. He glanced quickly around the church, his gaze finding mine for just a split second before darting away. Whatever Mom had whispered, it had clearly rattled him. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, clenched into fists. He said something back to her, his voice so low I couldn't hear it, but his tone seemed urgent. Mom nodded once, patted his cheek in what appeared to be an affectionate gesture, then walked away toward the vestry as if nothing had happened. Jackson stood there for a moment, looking like he'd been hit by a truck. David, his best friend, approached him with a concerned expression, clearly having noticed the change in Jackson's demeanor. I saw him shake his head and force a smile, then excuse himself to step outside. He claimed he needed some fresh air, but the way he practically bolted for the door told a different story.
My mind was racing. What could Mom have possibly said to cause such a reaction? Jackson wasn't easily shaken. In the 4 years I'd known him, I'd seen him handle high-pressure court cases, family emergencies, and stressful situations with remarkable composure. Whatever Mom had whispered genuinely disturbed him. I tried to push down the growing knot in my stomach and focus on the evening ahead. Maybe Jackson was just nervous about tomorrow. Maybe Mom had shared some embarrassing story from my childhood that caught him off guard. Maybe I was reading too much into a perfectly innocent interaction. But as we moved from the church to the rehearsal dinner at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Jackson had proposed to me exactly 1 year ago, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Jackson was quieter than usual during dinner, his responses to toasts and jokes feeling forced rather than genuine. He kept glancing at Mom throughout the evening, and she seemed to be avoiding his gaze entirely. The dinner itself was beautiful. Mom had reserved the entire back room of the restaurant, decorated with twinkling lights and white roses. The tables were set with our good china that Mom had borrowed from her sister, and the menu featured all of Jackson's favorite dishes. Everyone was in high spirits, sharing stories about Jackson and me, offering marriage advice that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious, and toasting our future together. My dad stood up during the main course to give a speech that had everyone in tears. He talked about watching me grow up, about the day I brought Jackson home and how he knew immediately that this man was different from all the others. He spoke about the way Jackson looked at me, the way he treated our family, and how proud he was to be gaining a son. Jackson smiled and nodded in all the right places, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his thigh under the table. Isabel gave a toast too, her artistic nature showing in the beautiful words she chose to describe our relationship. She talked about how Jackson brought out a lightness in me that she hadn't seen since we were kids, how he encouraged my serious nature while also helping me remember to have fun. She raised her glass and wished us a lifetime of adventures together, and everyone cheered and clinked glasses.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. But it was during Isabel's speech that I noticed something else strange. Mom was watching Isabel with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't the proud, loving gaze of a mother watching her daughter speak beautifully about her sister's happiness. There was something calculating in her expression, something that made my skin crawl. After dinner, as people began to mingle and move around the room, I cornered Mom by the dessert table. She was cutting slices of tiramisu with unusual focus, her movements precise and controlled. "Elena," I said, using her first name instead of Mom, which always got her attention. She looked up, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "Is everything okay? You seem tense tonight." She forced a bright smile and waved her hand dismissively. "Just wedding nerves, mija. You know how I get when I'm trying to make everything perfect." But I knew my mother well enough to recognize when she was lying. Elena Martinez was many things, but she wasn't a good actress. When she was genuinely stressed about event planning, she became a whirlwind of activity, barking orders and checking details obsessively. This was different. This was the kind of controlled behavior she exhibited when she was hiding something. "What did you say to Jackson at the church?" I asked directly. The question caught her off guard. She fumbled with the cake server, nearly dropping it. "Nothing important," she said quickly. "Just welcomed him to the family officially. You know how mother-in-law things." "Mom, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. What exactly did you say?" Before she could answer, Jackson appeared at my side. His color had returned somewhat, but there was still something off about his demeanor. He slipped his arm around my waist and kissed my temple, but the gesture felt mechanical rather than affectionate. "Everything all right over here?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Mom smiled at him, but I noticed she didn't quite meet his eyes. "Just discussing tomorrow's timeline," she said, "making sure everything runs smoothly." Jackson nodded, but his grip on my waist tightened slightly. "We should probably start thinking about wrapping up. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of goodbyes and final preparations.
People hugged us and wished us well, reminding us to get plenty of sleep and promising to see us bright and early tomorrow morning. Jackson's parents, who had flown in from Denver, seemed oblivious to any undercurrents of tension and were effusive in their praise of the evening and their excitement for tomorrow. As we said goodbye to my family, Mom hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear how proud she was of me, how beautiful tomorrow would be, how much she loved me. But when she hugged Jackson, the embrace was brief and awkward, nothing like the warm interaction I'd witnessed at the church. Jackson and I drove home in relative silence, the radio filling the space between us. Our apartment, which we'd lived in together for 2 years, felt different somehow as we walked through the door. Jackson went straight to the bedroom to change, while I stayed in the kitchen, trying to process the evening's strange undercurrents. When I joined him in the bedroom, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his dress shirt but with his tie loosened, staring at his hands. The sight of him looking so dejected sent a chill through me. "Jackson," I said softly, sitting beside him, "what's wrong? And please don't tell me it's just wedding nerves, because I know you better than that." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes were filled with something I'd never seen before. Confusion, maybe, or conflict. "Sophia, do you trust me?" The question surprised me. Of course I trust you. Why would you ask that? Because I need you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does, what I feel for you is real. What we have is real. His words sent ice through my veins. "Jackson, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He reached for my hands, holding them gently but firmly. "Your mom? At the church. She said something that I can't stop thinking about." My heart began to race. "What did she say?" Jackson looked directly into my eyes, and what I saw there terrified me. "She said I should marry your sister instead." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what Jackson had just told me. My mother had suggested he marry Isabel instead of me on the night before our wedding. The absurdity of it was almost as shocking as the betrayal. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Jackson's grip on my hands tightened. "She pulled me aside and said that Isabel would make me happier, that she's more suited to my personality, that I should reconsider before it's too late. She said she'd been watching us all together and realized she'd made a mistake in encouraging our relationship." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign that this was some kind of cruel joke. But Jackson's expression was deadly serious, and I could see the genuine confusion and hurt in his eyes. This wasn't something anyone would make up, especially not the night before their wedding. My mind raced through every interaction I'd witnessed between Jackson and Isabel over the past few months. Had there been something I missed? Some spark or connection that I'd been too blind to see? The thought made me physically ill. "What did you say to her?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Jackson ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he made when he was deeply stressed. "I told her she was wrong, that I love you and only you, that nothing could change that. But Sophia, the way she said it, it wasn't like she was being malicious or trying to hurt you. She seemed genuinely convinced that she was doing the right thing." That somehow made it worse. If Mom had been acting out of spite or jealousy, I could have understood it, even if I couldn't forgive it. But the idea that she truly believed Isabel was a better match for my fiancé was devastating in a way I couldn't articulate. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our small garden. The fairy lights Jackson had strung up for my birthday last month twinkled in the darkness, a reminder of happier times when our biggest concern was whether to plant tomatoes or herbs in the spring. "Did Isabel know?" I asked, without turning around. "Has she said anything to you about feelings?" "No," Jackson said firmly. "Absolutely not. Isabel has never been anything but supportive of our relationship. She's been excited about the wedding, helping with planning, asking about our honeymoon. If she has feelings for me, she's never shown them." I wanted to believe him, but doubt was creeping in like poison.
Isabel was spontaneous and free-spirited, everything I wasn't. She was artistic, where I was analytical, adventurous, where I was cautious. She made people laugh without trying, while I had to work at being social. If I was being honest with myself, there had always been a part of me that wondered why Jackson chose the serious sister over the fun one. Jackson stood and walked over to me, placing his hands gently on my shoulders. "Sophia, look at me." I turned to face him, and the tenderness in his expression almost undid me. "I fell in love with your mind first," he said softly. "The way you think about problems, the way you care about helping people, your dedication to your work. I fell in love with your laugh, which is rare and precious because you don't give it away easily. I fell in love with the way you make me want to be a better person, more thoughtful, more present. Isabel is wonderful, but she's not you. She could never be you." Tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. I wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into his arms and pretend this conversation had never happened. But the seed of doubt Mom had planted was already taking root. "What if she's right?" I whispered. "What if you would be happier with someone more like her?" Jackson cupped my face in his hands, wiping away my tears with his thumbs. "The only thing that would make me happier is if we could fast forward past all this wedding stress and just be married already. Sophia, I chose you. Not because your family expected it, not because it was convenient, but because you're the person I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life." We held each other in the quiet of our bedroom, but I could feel something fundamental had shifted between us. The certainty I'd felt about our relationship, about my place in his heart, had been shaken. I tried to push the doubts away, but they clung to me like shadows. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake listening to Jackson's steady breathing, wondering if he was really as peaceful as he seemed, or if he was also staring at the ceiling, replaying Mom's words. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Isabel's face, tried to imagine her in a wedding dress walking down the aisle toward Jackson. The image was surprisingly easy to conjure, and that terrified me. Morning came too soon, and with it the chaos of wedding day preparations. My apartment is filled with bridesmaids, makeup artists, hairstylists, and photographers. Sarah had arrived with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery, determined to make sure I ate something despite my nerves. The other bridesmaids chattered excitedly about the ceremony, the reception, and how beautiful everything was going to be. But I felt like I was watching it all from outside myself, going through the motions while my mind remained stuck on the previous night's revelation. When the makeup artist asked if I was okay because I seemed pale, I blamed it on wedding jitters and forced myself to smile. Isabel arrived with Mom around 10 in the morning, both of them carrying garment bags and looking perfectly put together despite the early hour. Isabel immediately joined the excited chatter of the bridesmaids, complimenting everyone's hair and makeup, taking pictures with her phone, and generally being her charming social self. Mom was more subdued than I expected. She went through the motions of checking on details, making sure everyone had what they needed, and coordinating with the photographers. But there was a stiffness to her movements that I recognized. She was feeling guilty about something. When she approached me as I sat in the makeup chair, I watched her reflection in the mirror. She looked older than I remembered, worry lines more pronounced around her eyes. "Mija," she said softly, placing her hand on my shoulder. "You look so beautiful, like a princess." The compliment felt hollow, loaded with the weight of what she'd done the night before. I met her eyes in the mirror, and she immediately looked away. "Thanks, Mom," I said evenly. She hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but the bustling activity around us made private conversation impossible. Instead, she squeezed my shoulder and moved away to fuss with the wedding dress hanging in the corner. As the morning progressed, I found myself watching Isabel with new eyes. She was helping Sarah pin flowers in the younger bridesmaid's hair, laughing at something one of them said, and looking radiant in her dusty rose bridesmaid's dress. She caught me staring and gave me a brilliant smile. "You nervous, sis?" she asked, walking over to where I sat. "Something like that," I replied. She knelt beside my chair, taking my hand in both of hers. "Sophia, I want you to know that Jackson is lucky to have you. You two are perfect together, and I couldn't be happier that you found each other." Her words seemed genuine, her expression open and loving. Either Isabel was much better actress than I had ever given her credit for,
Or she truly had no idea what Mom had said to Jackson. The confusion was eating me alive. Around noon, Dad arrived to check on our progress and to escape what he called the testosterone circus happening at Jackson's hotel suite, where the groomsmen were apparently engaged in some kind of competition involving cologne and hair gel. His presence brought some normalcy back to the room, and I felt myself relax slightly as he told funny stories about trying to tie his tie properly and Jackson's nervous energy. But even Dad's comforting presence couldn't completely dispel the cloud hanging over me. Every time someone mentioned how perfect Jackson and I were together, every time someone talked about our future, I thought about Mom's words. Every time I looked at Isabel, I wondered if there was something there I'd been too naive or too trusting to see. The photographer wanted to take some final getting ready shots, so we all posed and smiled while she captured what were supposed to be candid moments of joy and anticipation. I smiled on cue, hugged my bridesmaids when directed, and tried to look like a radiant bride instead of someone whose world had been turned upside down 12 hours earlier. As I stood in my wedding dress for the first time, surrounded by the people who loved me most, I realized that I was about to walk down the aisle with a question mark hanging over everything I thought I knew about my relationship, my family, and myself. The woman in the mirror looked like a bride, but inside, I felt like I was about to step into quicksand. The limousine that would take us to the church was scheduled to arrive in 30 minutes. Ready or not, it was time to find out if the life I'd planned was built on solid ground, or if it would all come crashing down the moment I said, I do. The limousine ride to St. Michael's Cathedral felt both endless and far too short. I sat pressed against the window, watching Portland's familiar streets blur past, while my bridesmaids chatted excitedly around me. Sarah kept trying to engage me in conversation about the reception playlist and the surprise dance Jackson and I had been secretly practicing, but my responses were mechanical, distracted. Isabel sat across from me, periodically checking her phone and updating everyone on messages from Jackson's side. The groomsmen were already at the church, she reported, and apparently David had successfully talked Jackson out of his third wardrobe change. Everyone laughed, but I barely registered the joke. The closer we got to the cathedral, the more my chest tightened with anxiety. Mom rode in the car behind us with Dad and Miguel, which was probably for the best. I wasn't sure I could handle sitting across from her for 20 minutes, pretending everything was normal, while her words from the night before echoed in my head. When we pulled up to the church, I was struck by how different it looked from the night before. The stone facade was decorated with white ribbon and cascading flowers, and a red carpet had been rolled out from the street to the main entrance. Guests were already arriving, dressed in their finest clothes, chatting and laughing as they made their way inside. It looked exactly like the fairy tale wedding I'd always dreamed of. But fairy tales don't usually involve mothers sabotaging their daughter's happiness. The bridal suite at St. Michael's was a small room adjacent to the sanctuary, traditionally used for final preparations. As soon as we entered, the photographers began capturing our last-minute touch-ups and final moments before the ceremony. I submitted to having my lipstick reapplied and my veil adjusted, but I felt like I was watching someone else go through these motions. Through the small window, I could see guests continuing to arrive. Jackson's colleagues from his law firm, my friends from graduate school, neighbors who had watched me grow up, relatives who had traveled from across the country to be here. 200 people who believed they were about to witness the beginning of my happily ever after. Sarah appeared at my side with a small flask she had hidden in her purse. "Emergency bride fuel," she announced with a grin. "Just one sip for courage." I took the flask gratefully, letting the whiskey burn away some of the cold anxiety that had settled in my stomach. The warmth helped, but it couldn't silence the doubts that had been multiplying like weeds since last night. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Mom entered looking elegant in her navy blue dress, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. To anyone else, she would have appeared calm and composed, the picture of a proud mother on her daughter's wedding day.
but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. 5 minutes, she announced to the room. Father McKenna is ready to begin the processional. The bridesmaids began gathering their bouquets and checking their appearance one final time. Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered that everything would be perfect, that I looked radiant, that Jackson was the luckiest man alive. I nodded and tried to smile, but the expression felt foreign on my face. As the others filed out to take their positions, Mom lingered behind. For a moment, we were alone in the small room, mother and daughter, on what should have been one of the most important days of my life. Sophia, she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, I need to tell you something. My heart stopped. Was she about to confess? Explain why she'd tried to derail my wedding the night before? Apologize for planting seeds of doubt that had kept me awake all night? You look so much like I did on my wedding day, she continued instead. 28 years ago, standing in the same room, wearing your grandmother's pearls just like you are now. I was so young, so sure that love was enough to build a life on. This wasn't what I had expected her to say. Mom rarely talked about the early days of her marriage to Dad, and when she did, it was usually with fondness and nostalgia. But love isn't enough, mija, she said softly. Marriage requires compatibility, shared values, similar dreams. It requires being with someone who brings out the best in you, not just someone who makes you feel safe. Her words felt like arrows aimed directly at my heart. Every sentence seemed designed to reinforce the doubts that she'd planted in Jackson's mind the night before. Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, what exactly are you trying to tell me?
She looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room, and what I saw in her eyes was a mixture of love and something that looked like pity. I'm trying to tell you that it's not too late to change your mind if you're having doubts. The room felt like it was spinning. My own mother was giving me an out on my wedding day, practically encouraging me to run, the woman who had spent months planning every detail of the ceremony, who had been more excited than I was about the engagement, was now suggesting I might be making a mistake. Before I could respond, Dad appeared in the doorway. "Time to go, Princessa," he said gently. "Everyone's waiting." Mom straightened her shoulders and transformed back into the composed mother of the bride. She kissed my cheek carefully to avoid smudging my makeup and whispered that she loved me, no matter what. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with Dad and a head full of confusion. Dad offered me his arm, his eyes crinkling with pride and joy. "You ready for this, mija?" I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to explain about Mom's conversation with Jackson, about the doubts that were eating me alive, about the fear that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. But looking at his face, seeing how happy he was, how proud he was to be walking me down the aisle, I couldn't find the words. Instead, I nodded and took his arm, letting him lead me toward the sanctuary doors. The moment we stepped into the back of the church, I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. The pews were packed with familiar faces, all turned toward us with expectant smiles. The altar was decorated with cascading white flowers and soft candlelight. The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's Canon, the music I'd chosen months ago when everything in my life felt certain and secure. But it was the sight of Jackson at the altar that truly took my breath away. He stood tall and handsome in his black tuxedo, his hands clasped in front of him, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity that made everything else fade away. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the doubts and confusion, seeing him there waiting for me brought back every reason I'd fallen in love with him. As Dad and I began our slow walk down the aisle, I tried to focus on Jackson's face, on the love I could see there, on the future we'd planned together. But with each step, Mom's words echoed louder in my mind. Her suggestion that Isabel would make him happier, her implication that I wasn't the right choice, her last-minute attempt to give me an escape route.
Halfway down the aisle, I caught sight of Isabel, standing with the other bridesmaids. She looked stunning in her dusty rose dress, her hair styled in soft waves, her face glowing with what appeared to be genuine happiness for me. When our eyes met, she gave me an encouraging smile and mouthed the words, "You got this." But instead of comfort, her support only intensified my confusion. If Isabel truly cared about my happiness, if she had no romantic feelings for Jackson, then why had Mom been so convinced that she was the better choice? What had Mom seen that I'd missed? The faces in the pews blurred together as we continued our procession. Jackson's parents beaming with pride, my college friends dabbing at their eyes with tissues, colleagues from the therapy clinic where I just started working. All these people had come to celebrate what they believed was a perfect match, a love story with a happy ending. As we reached the altar, Dad lifted my veil and kissed my forehead before placing my hand in Jackson's. The gesture was symbolic, the traditional passing of responsibility from father to husband, but in that moment, it felt more like Dad was handing me over to uncertainty. Jackson's hand was warm and steady as it closed around mine, and when he leaned close to whisper that I looked beautiful, his voice was filled with the same tenderness I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. For a moment, standing there beside him, I almost forgot about everything else. But as Father McKenna began the opening words of the ceremony, as 200 guests settled into respectful silence, I realized that I was about to make the most important commitment of my life while harboring doubts that threatened to consume me. The question wasn't whether Jackson loved me. I could see that truth written clearly on his face. The question was whether Mom was right, whether I was about to trap us both in a marriage built on the wrong foundation. Father McKenna's voice echoed through the cathedral as he spoke about the sacred nature of marriage, about commitment and trust, and the joining of two lives into one. But all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and erratic, as I stood on the precipice of a decision that would define the rest of my life. The ceremony proceeded with ritualistic precision. Father McKenna spoke about the sanctity of marriage while I stood frozen beside Jackson, my bouquet trembling in my hands. The words washed over me without penetration, background noise to the storm raging in my mind. Jackson kept glancing at me with concern, clearly sensing my distress, but unable to address it in front of 200 guests. When Father McKenna asked if anyone had objections to this union, the traditional pause that followed felt eternal. I found myself actually hoping someone would speak up, would give me a reason to stop this train before it reached its destination. But the cathedral remained silent, except for the soft rustling of fabric and the distant sound of traffic outside. The moment arrived for our personal vows, the ones we'd written separately and planned to surprise each other with. Jackson went first, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket with hands that shook slightly. His voice was strong and clear as he spoke about the day we met, about falling in love with my passion for helping others, about the way he challenged me to be better. He talked about our future together, the children we wanted to have, the adventures we'd planned.
Sophia, he concluded, looking directly into my eyes, you are my anchor and my compass. You ground me when I'm lost and guide me toward becoming the man I want to be. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but especially in the difficult ones. I promise to choose you every day, not because it's expected, but because I cannot imagine a life where you're not by my side. The congregation sighed collectively at his words, and I saw several people wiping away tears. Jackson's vows were beautiful, heartfelt, and everything I should have wanted to hear. But instead of joy, I felt a crushing weight of responsibility. How could I promise him the same devotion when I was standing here questioning everything? When Father McKenna turned to me expectantly, I reached for the piece of paper where I'd written my vows weeks ago. The words I'd crafted seemed to belong to a different person, someone who had been certain of her choices, confident in her love. Reading them now felt like a betrayal of everything I was feeling. Jackson, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. From the moment I met you, you've been my safe harbor in every storm. You've supported my dreams even when they took me away from you, celebrated my successes as if they were your own, and held me through every failure and disappointment. I paused,
looking out at the sea of expectant faces. Mom sat in the front row, her expression unreadable. Isabel stood among my bridesmaids, her eyes bright with what looked like genuine emotion. Dad nodded encouragingly from his seat, clearly proud of the words I was speaking. But as I continued reading my vows, promising Jackson my heart and my future, I felt like I was signing a contract under false pretenses. Every word felt hollow, every promise tainted by the uncertainty that had taken root in my soul. The ring exchange passed in a blur. Jackson's hands were steady as he slipped the wedding band onto my finger, but I could barely control the trembling in mine as I returned the gesture. The gold felt heavy and foreign, a symbol of commitment I wasn't sure I was ready to make. Father McKenna began the final blessing, his words about God joining us together as one flesh, echoing through the cathedral. This was it, the moment of truth. In less than a minute, I would be Mrs. Jackson Reed, bound by law and sacred vow to the man beside me. By the power vested in me by the state of Oregon and the Catholic Church, Father McKenna announced, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jackson, you may kiss your bride. Jackson's hands cupped my face gently, his eyes searching mine one last time before he leaned in. The kiss was soft, tender, filled with 4 years of love and dreams of our future together. The congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The photographer's camera flashed, and the string quartet began playing the recessional music. But as Jackson's lips touched mine, sealing our union, I felt something inside me break. Not from joy or overwhelming emotion, but from the terrible realization that I had just committed my life to someone while harboring doubts that might destroy us both. The walk back down the aisle was a parade of smiling faces and congratulations. People threw rose petals and rice, despite the church's prohibition against it, their joy infectious and overwhelming. Jackson held my hand tightly, occasionally squeezing it and grinning at me with pure happiness. To everyone watching, we must have looked like the perfect couple beginning their perfect life together. The receiving line outside the church was endless. Person after person embraced us, offered congratulations, and shared their excitement for our future. Jackson's law firm colleagues joked about bachelor parties and honeymoon destinations. My graduate school friends reminisced about late-night study sessions where I'd talked endlessly about this amazing guy I'd met. Family members shared memories of watching us fall in love and predictions about our children. Through it all, I smiled and thanked people and played the role of the radiant bride. But internally, I felt like I was drowning. Each congratulation felt like another weight pulling me deeper underwater, another witness I would have to face if this marriage fell apart, another witness to what might turn out to be an elaborate mistake. When Mom reached us in the receiving line, she hugged Jackson first, holding the embrace longer than necessary. Her whispered words were too quiet for me to hear, but I saw Jackson's jaw tighten slightly before he nodded and stepped back. When she turned to me, her embrace was warm but brief, and her congratulations felt perfunctory rather than heartfelt. Isabel's hug, by contrast, was enthusiastic and genuine. She spun me around despite my elaborate dress and veil, laughing about how we were now officially sisters. Her joy seemed authentic, which only added to my confusion. If she had feelings for Jackson, she was either an incredible actress or completely unaware of them herself. The photography session that followed was torture disguised as celebration. The photographer posed us in countless combinations, Jackson and me alone, with our immediate families, with the wedding party, with various groups of friends and relatives. Each shot required smiles and embraces and expressions of joy that I had to manufacture from scratch. During a brief break, while the photographer changed lenses, Jackson pulled me aside behind a cluster of flowering bushes. "Sophia, are you okay? You seem distant. Ever since the ceremony started, you felt like you're somewhere else."
His concern was genuine, his love evident in every word, which made lying to him even more painful. "I'm just overwhelmed," I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. "It's a lot, you know, all these people, all this attention. I'll be fine once we get to the reception and things settle down." Jackson studied my face carefully, clearly not entirely convinced by my explanation. But with the photographer calling us back and dozens of people waiting for more pictures, there wasn't time for a deeper conversation.
The reception venue was a short drive from the church, and Jackson and I rode alone in the decorated limousine while the wedding party followed in separate cars. For the first time all day, we had a few minutes of relative privacy, but instead of feeling like a relief, it felt like being trapped in a small space with my guilt and uncertainty. Jackson reached for my hand as we settled into the leather seats. "We did it," he said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "We're actually married." The happiness in his voice was like a knife to my heart. "Yes," I managed to say. "We did it." He lifted our joined hands and kissed my knuckles, the gesture so tender and loving that I had to close my eyes to keep from crying. This man loved me completely, had just committed his life to me in front of everyone we cared about, and I was sitting beside him questioning whether we belonged together. The reception hall looked like something from a magazine spread. Mom had outdone herself with the decorations, cascading flowers, twinkling lights, elegant table settings that must have cost a fortune. Our guests were already mingling with cocktails, chatting animatedly about the beautiful ceremony and the lovely couple who had just been wed. As we entered the hall for our grand entrance, the applause was thunderous. People stood and cheered as the DJ announced, "Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Reed," for the first time. Jackson raised our joined hands in acknowledgement, his smile radiant and genuine. I waved and tried to match his enthusiasm, but I felt like an imposter accepting praise for a performance I wasn't sure I believed in. Our first dance was to the same song we'd danced to the night Jackson proposed, a slow, romantic ballad about finding your soulmate and never letting go. As he spun me around the dance floor, whispering sweet words in my ear about how beautiful I looked and how happy he was, I wondered if this would be the last time we danced together as people who trusted each other completely. Because somewhere between Mom's devastating whisper at the rehearsal and this moment spinning in my new husband's arms, I had realized something terrible. I no longer knew if I could trust my own judgment about love, about family, or about the choices that would define the rest of my life. The reception unfolded like a perfectly choreographed performance. Course after course of exquisite food was served, while guests mingled between tables, sharing stories and laughter. The band Mom had hired kept the dance floor packed with couples swaying to romantic ballads and groups of friends attempting elaborate line dances they half remembered from college parties. I moved through it all like an actress playing a role I'd never auditioned for, cutting the three-tiered cake while photographers captured every angle, tossing my bouquet to eager single women who believed catching it would bring them luck and love, participating in the traditional dances with Jackson that we'd practiced weeks ago when everything felt simple and certain. But beneath the surface performance, my mind was racing. Every interaction felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every smile from Mom seemed to carry a secret message. Every loving gesture from Jackson felt like evidence that I was deceiving someone who deserved better than a wife who questioned their entire relationship on their wedding day. During the dinner service, I found myself studying the dynamics at our family table with new eyes. Dad was regaling Jackson's parents with stories about his vintage car restoration projects, his enthusiasm genuine and infectious. Miguel was showing Jackson's younger sister photos from his college basketball season, the two of them bonding over their shared love of sports. Everyone seemed relaxed and happy, celebrating the merger of two families who genuinely liked each other. But Mom was different. She participated in conversations when directly addressed, smiled at appropriate moments, and fulfilled all her hostess duties with practiced grace. Yet there was a distance in her manner that I recognized from childhood. The way she behaved when she was thinking about something else entirely, her mind occupied with concerns she couldn't or wouldn't share. Isabel, seated between two of my college friends, was her usual charming self. She entertained the table with stories from her travels through Europe, describing bizarre foods she'd tried and eccentric artists she'd met in tiny Tuscan villages. Jackson listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about her painting techniques and the inspiration behind her latest series of landscapes. Watching them interact, I searched for any sign of the romantic undercurrent Mom had implied, but their conversation seemed entirely appropriate, the kind of friendly exchange you'd expect between future in-laws who respected each other's interests. If there were deeper feelings involved, neither of them was showing it. As the evening progressed, various guests approached our table to share memories and offer toasts. Jackson's law school roommate told an embarrassing story about Jackson's first attempt at cooking for a girlfriend that had resulted in a minor kitchen fire. My sorority sister recalled the night I called her crying with happiness after Jackson's proposal, describing in detail how he'd planned the perfect evening at the restaurant where we'd had our first date.
These stories should have filled me with warmth and nostalgia, reminders of how far Jackson and I had come together. Instead, they felt like evidence in a trial where I was both defendant and jury, each anecdote raising new questions about whether our relationship was built on genuine compatibility or simply the momentum of expectations and convenience. The father-daughter dance with Dad provided a brief respite from my spiraling thoughts. As we moved slowly around the dance floor to a Spanish ballad he'd chosen, his strong hands guiding me with the same confidence he'd shown when teaching me to dance as a little girl, I felt momentarily anchored to something solid and unchanging. "You look troubled, princessa," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the music. "Wedding day nerves are normal, but this seems like something more." For a moment, I was tempted to tell him everything, to explain about Mom's conversation with Jackson, about the doubts that had consumed me, about the fear that I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. Dad had always been my confidant, the person I turned to when the world felt uncertain. But looking into his proud, happy face, seeing the joy in his eyes as he danced with his newly married daughter, I couldn't bring myself to shatter his faith in this day. Whatever was happening with Mom, whatever confusion I was feeling, it seemed cruel to burden him with it during what he clearly saw as one of the most important celebrations of our family's life. "Just overwhelmed," I said finally, echoing the excuse I'd given Jackson earlier. "It's a lot to process. Becoming a wife, starting this new chapter." Dad nodded understandingly and pulled me closer. "Marriage is a journey, mija, not a destination. Your mother and I, we've had our challenges over the years, times when we questioned everything. But love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice you make every day. You choose to forgive, to compromise, to put your partner's needs alongside your own." His words were meant to be comforting, but they only intensified my anxiety. How could I choose to love Jackson every day if I wasn't even sure I'd chosen correctly in the first place? How could I promise to put his needs first when I was sitting here wondering if he'd be better off with someone else entirely? The mother-son dance between Jackson and his mom, Patricia, was touching in its simplicity. She was a quiet woman who expressed her love through actions rather than words, and watching her beam with pride as she danced with her son reminded me of all the family traditions and expectations that had led us to this moment. Jackson's family had embraced me completely, treating me like the daughter they'd never had, trusting that I would make their son happy for the rest of his life. When the formal dances concluded, the real party began. The band launched into upbeat classics that brought multiple generations onto the dance floor. I watched my teenage cousins teaching Jackson's grandmother how to do some contemporary dance move while she laughed with delight. Miguel and Isabel led an impromptu conga line that wound between the tables, picking up participants until half the reception was involved. These were the moments that should have filled me with pure joy, seeing our families blend together, watching people I loved celebrating our happiness, being surrounded by the warmth and support of our community. Instead, I felt like I was observing it all from behind glass, present in body, but emotionally removed from the celebration happening around me. Jackson eventually found me standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching the festivities with what must have been an expression of detached observation. He approached with 2 glasses of champagne and that concerned look that had been appearing more frequently throughout the evening. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Reed," he said, offering me one of the glasses. The name, my new legal name, sent another wave of anxiety through me. Mrs. Reed. Sophia Reed. I'd been practicing signing it for weeks, looking forward to the moment when it would become official. Now it felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. "Just taking it all in," I said, accepting the champagne. "It's surreal, isn't it? This morning we were engaged and now we're married. Everything's different, but somehow exactly the same." Jackson studied my face with the careful attention he typically reserved for complex legal briefs. "Sophia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me."
My heart rate accelerated. Had he noticed more than I'd realized? Was my performance as the happy bride less convincing than I'd hoped? Are you having second thoughts about this? About us? Because if you are, we need to talk about it now before we go any further. The directness of his question caught me off guard. This was Jackson at his most lawyer-like, cutting through pretense and evasion to get to the truth of the matter. It was one of the qualities I'd always admired about him, his inability to let important things remain unspoken. I opened my mouth to give him another reassuring deflection, but something in his expression stopped me. The love was still there, but underneath it was a vulnerability I'd rarely seen from him. He was genuinely worried that he'd married someone who didn't want to be married to him, and the pain of that possibility was written clearly across his face. "Jackson," I said carefully, choosing my words with the same precision he used in his closing arguments. "I love you. That hasn't changed, not even a little bit. But your conversation with my mother last night, it's made me question things I thought I was certain about." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening slightly. "I was hoping we could get through tonight without having to discuss that."
But we can't, can we? I said softly. Because now it's out there. This idea that maybe we're not as perfect for each other as everyone thinks, and I can't just pretend I haven't heard it. Jackson set down his champagne glass and took my hands in his touch warm and steady despite the tension in his face. "Sophia, your mother's opinion doesn't define our relationship. What matters is what you and I know about each other, about what we've built together." But what if she's right? The question escaped before I could stop it. The fear I'd been carrying finally given voice. What if you would be happier with someone more like Isabel? Someone more spontaneous, more artistic, more fun? Jackson's expression shifted from concern to something closer to frustration. "Is that really what you think? That I chose you because I couldn't have her? That our entire relationship is some kind of consolation prize?" The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and I realized that my doubts weren't just hurting me, they were devastating the man I'd just promised to love and honor for the rest of my life. "No!" I said quickly. "That's not what I think." But Mom seemed so certain, so convinced that she was right, and she knows me better than anyone. What if she sees something I'm too close to notice? Around us, the party continued in full swing. Our guests were laughing and dancing and celebrating what they believed was the perfect beginning to our perfect life together. But in our small bubble near the edge of the dance floor, Jackson and I were having the conversation that would determine whether our marriage would survive its first day. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving my face. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but firm. "Sophia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I didn't fall in love with an idea of who you should be or who someone else thinks you should be. I fell in love with exactly who you are. Your dedication to your work, your loyalty to your family, your quiet strength, your incredible mind. If I wanted someone spontaneous and artistic, I would have pursued someone spontaneous and artistic. But I didn't. I pursued you. I chose you, and I married you because you're exactly who I want to spend my life with." His words were everything I should have wanted to hear, but the seed of doubt Mom had planted had taken deep root. Even as he spoke with complete conviction about his feelings, I found myself wondering if he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Jackson's passionate defense of our relationship should have reassured me, but instead it highlighted how far apart we drifted in just 24 hours. Here was my new husband, pouring his heart out about why he'd chosen me, while I stood before him consumed by doubts that felt impossible to dismiss. The music shifted to a slower song, and couples around us moved closer together on the dance floor. We were standing in the middle of our own wedding reception, surrounded by everyone we loved, having what might be the most important conversation of our lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Jackson," I said quietly, "I want to believe everything you're saying, but what if Mom sees something we don't? What if she's noticed something between you and Isabel that we've been too close to recognize?" He ran his hand through his hair,
a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during our relationship, usually when he was dealing with a particularly difficult case or challenging client. Sophia, I need you to really think about this. Your mother waited until the night before our wedding to share this opinion. If she genuinely believed Isabel and I were better suited for each other, don't you think she would have mentioned it months ago, years ago? Why would she wait until the last possible moment? Unless... He trailed off, his expression shifting from frustration to something darker. Unless what? I prompted. Unless she wanted to plant doubt in your mind right when it would do the most damage. The accusation hung between us like a physical presence. The idea that Mom would deliberately sabotage my wedding was almost too painful to consider, but the timing was suspicious. Why wait until the rehearsal to share such a momentous concern? Before I could respond, Isabel appeared at my side, slightly breathless from dancing and glowing with the kind of natural radiance that made everyone around her feel more alive. "There you are," she said, linking her arm through mine. "I've been looking for you everywhere. Aunt Carmen wants to get a picture with all the Martinez women before Uncle Luis drinks too much champagne and starts his inappropriate stories." Her interruption felt both perfectly timed and completely unwelcome. Here was the woman at the center of my crisis, beautiful and vibrant and completely oblivious to the turmoil she had inadvertently caused. "Actually," Jackson said before I could respond, "could we have just one more minute? Sophia and I were in the middle of something important." Isabel's expression shifted to concern as she looked between us, clearly picking up on the tension. "Oh, sorry, is everything okay? You both look kind of stressed." It was such a simple question, but it opened a door I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. Standing there with both Jackson and Isabel, the three people at the heart of this confusion, I felt an overwhelming urge to just ask directly, to clear the air once and for all, regardless of the consequences.
"Isabel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded, her dark eyes serious. "Of course, anything." "Do you have feelings for Jackson?" The question fell between us like a stone dropped into still water. Isabel's eyes widened in shock, and Jackson made a sound that was part surprise, part dismay. Around us, the party continued, but our small circle had become an island of tense silence. "What?" Isabel said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, why would you ask me that?" "Because Mom told Jackson that he should marry you instead of me, because she seems to think you two are better suited for each other, because I've been questioning everything I thought I knew about my own relationship since last night." The words tumbled out faster than I could control them, months of insecurity and self-doubt finally given voice. Isabel stared at me in horror while Jackson closed his eyes and shook his head. "What?" Isabel's voice rose slightly, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. "She told Jackson he should marry me?" "At the rehearsal last night," Jackson confirmed grimly. "She pulled me aside and suggested I was making a mistake, that you would make me happier than Sophia would." Isabel looked between us with an expression of complete bewilderment. "But that's insane! Sophia, Jackson worships you. Anyone with eyes can see how much he loves you. And I would never. I mean, you're my sister. Even if I had feelings for him, which I absolutely don't, I would never act on them or encourage them." Her denial was immediate and emphatic, but I found myself studying her face for any sign of deception. She seemed genuinely shocked by the accusation, but people could be skilled at hiding their true feelings. "Then why would Mom say something like that?" I asked. "What would she gain by trying to break us up?" Isabel was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. When she spoke, her voice was careful, as if she was working through something complex. "Sophia, can I ask you something now? And I need you to be honest with me, too." I nodded. though part of me dreaded what she might ask. Do you actually want to be married to Jackson, or do you want to be married to him? The question hit me like a physical blow. It was so direct, so cutting, that it bypassed all my defenses and went straight to the heart of my confusion. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew what she meant. "I mean, are you questioning this marriage because you genuinely have doubts about Jackson, or because Mom planted doubts in your mind and now you feel like you should have them?" Jackson was watching this exchange with intense focus, his expression unreadable. Other guests continued to dance and celebrate around us, oblivious to the fact that the bride was having a breakdown in the middle of her own reception. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "I thought I was sure about everything until last night. Jackson and I have been together for 4 years. We've talked about our future, made plans, built a life together. But now I can't tell if I was happy because I actually was happy or because everyone expected me to be." Isabel reached for my hands, her grip warm and reassuring. "Sophia, you've been making your own decisions your entire life. You chose your college major despite Dad wanting you to study business. You chose graduate school even though Mom thought you should get married first. You chose your career path, your apartment, your friends. Why would you suddenly lose the ability to choose the right partner?" Her words made sense, but the doubt had burrowed so deep that logic couldn't easily dislodge it. Jackson stepped closer, his voice gentle but determined. "Sophia, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Yesterday morning, before the rehearsal, I was the happiest I've ever been in my life. I was about to marry the woman I love, surrounded by people who care about us. But last night, after your mother said what she said, I spent hours questioning everything too." I looked up at him, surprised. "You did?" He nodded. "I wondered if she saw something I was missing, if I was being selfish by marrying you when maybe you'd be happier with someone else. I wondered if 4 years of relationship was built on compatibility or just habit. I wondered if I was enough for you, if I could make you happy for the next 50 years. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and I realized that Mom's words had hurt him just as much as they'd hurt me.
But you know what I realized? He continued. Those doubts weren't coming from anything real between us. They were coming from fear. Fear that someone else might know better than we do what's right for our lives. And that's not love talking, Sophia. That's insecurity. His words resonated in a way that cut through some of the confusion I'd been carrying. For 4 years, Jackson and I had built something solid and meaningful together. We'd supported each other through career challenges, family crises, and personal growth. We'd made each other laugh, comforted each other through difficult times, and consistently chosen to prioritize our relationship even when it was inconvenient. All of that couldn't be erased by one conversation, no matter who initiated it. As if summoned by our discussion, Mom appeared in my peripheral vision. She was approaching our small group with a determined expression, clearly having noticed our intense conversation from across the room. "Mija," she said as she reached us, "is everything all right? People are starting to ask where the bride went." Her timing was either coincidental or calculated, and given everything that had happened, I was beginning to suspect the latter. "Actually, Mom," I said, turning to face her directly, "I think we need to talk, all of us." Elena's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something, guilt, fear, crossing her features before she composed herself. "Of course," she said smoothly, "but perhaps this isn't the best time or place. You have guests to attend to." "No," I said firmly, "this is exactly the right time and place. You nearly destroyed my marriage before it even began, and I need to understand why." The accusation was stark and undeniable, and I saw Mom flinch as if I'd struck her. Around us, the party continued, but our family drama was beginning to attract more attention. Several guests had noticed our heated discussion and were watching with poorly concealed curiosity. "Sophia," Mom said, quietly, "I think you're overreacting. I simply shared an observation with Jackson. I never meant to cause problems." "An observation?" Isabel interjected, her voice sharp with indignation. "You told my sister's fiancé that he should marry me instead. How is that just an observation?" Mom's composure finally cracked. Her carefully maintained facade crumbled, revealing the desperation underneath. "Because I could see it," she said, her voice rising. "I could see the way you two connected, the way you made each other laugh, the way you seemed to understand each other effortlessly. Sophia, you and Jackson are fine together, but with Isabel, he came alive in a way I'd never seen before." Her words hung in the air like an accusation. I felt Jackson tense beside me, while Isabel made a sound of pure disbelief. "Elena," Jackson said, his voice carefully controlled, "you're describing friendship. Isabel and I enjoy each other's company because she's intelligent and interesting and going to be my sister-in-law. That doesn't mean we're romantically compatible." But Mom was beyond reason now, the facade of the composed mother completely abandoned. "You're both so young," she said desperately. "You don't understand that compatibility isn't just about love. It's about temperament, interests, life goals. Sophia, you're serious and focused, and that's wonderful. But Jackson needs someone who can bring lightness to his life, someone who can help him relax, help him enjoy the moment." The implication was clear. I wasn't enough for him. I was too serious, too focused, too boring to make him truly happy. But instead of the devastating blow I expected, Mom's words had the opposite effect. They clarified something I'd been struggling to understand since the rehearsal. This wasn't about Jackson's happiness or my suitability as a wife. This was about Mom's own fears and regrets, her own unfulfilled dreams projected onto our relationship. "Mom," I said gently, "is this about Dad?" Her face went white, and I knew I'd hit the truth. "Dad's wonderful," I continued, "but he's practical and steady, just like me. Did you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd married someone different? Someone more artistic, more spontaneous?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time since this whole crisis began, I saw her clearly. Not as the manipulative mother trying to destroy my wedding, but as a woman in her 50s who had spent years wondering about roads not taken. "I love your father," she whispered, "but sometimes I wonder if I settled for security instead of passion, for stability instead of adventure. When I see Jackson with Isabel, laughing and talking about art and travel, I see the life I might have had if I'd been braver." The confession hung between us, raw and vulnerable. This had never been about Jackson and me at all. It had been about Mom's own regrets, her fear that I was making the same choice she had, choosing the safe option instead of the exciting one. "But Mom," I said softly, "Jackson isn't my safe choice. He's my right choice. He doesn't make me feel secure because he's boring. He makes me feel secure because he loves me exactly as I am, and I love him the same way." I turned to face Jackson, seeing him clearly for the first time since Mom's whisper had planted its poison seed. "I don't need someone to make me more spontaneous," I said, looking directly into his eyes. "I need someone who appreciates my seriousness, who supports my goals, who makes me want to be the best version of myself. That's you. That's always been you." Jackson's smile was radiant, the same expression I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago in that coffee shop. "And I don't need someone to bring lightness to my life," he said, reaching for my hands. "I need someone who grounds me, who challenges me to think deeper, who makes me want to be worthy of her love. That's you, Sophia. It's always been you."
Around us, our guests had begun to gather, drawn by the intensity of our conversation. But for the first time all day, I didn't care who was watching. I was exactly where I belonged, with exactly the right person, finally free from the doubts that had nearly destroyed us both. Mom was crying openly now, her makeup streaked, but her expression lighter than it had been in months. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I let my own fears cloud my judgment. You two are perfect for each other, and I nearly ruined that because of my own issues." Isabel stepped forward and wrapped Mom in a fierce hug. "We're all going to be okay," she said softly. "But maybe you and Dad should talk about taking that European trip you've been planning for 20 years. Mom laughed through her tears, nodding as she wiped her eyes. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of joy and reconciliation. Jackson and I danced like newlyweds who were actually happy to be married, our earlier tension replaced by a deeper understanding of each other and our relationship. Mom relaxed into genuine celebration mode, her earlier anxiety replaced by authentic happiness for our union. Months later, as Jackson and I settled into married life, I realized that Mom's interference had ultimately made our relationship stronger by forcing us to examine our connection under pressure, to defend our choice to be together. We discovered truths about our love that might have taken years to uncover otherwise. And 6 months after our wedding, Mom and Dad did take that European trip. The photos she sent showed a woman discovering parts of herself she'd forgotten existed, while Dad looked on with the same loving expression he'd worn when I was dancing with him at my wedding. Sometimes the best marriages aren't the ones that never face challenges, but the ones that survive them and emerge stronger on the other side. Jackson and I learned that lesson on our wedding day, in front of 200 guests who thought they were just celebrating a union, but actually witnessed the true beginning of our life together. Because love isn't just about choosing someone once, it's about choosing them again and again, even when others question that choice, even when doubt creeps in, even when it would be easier to walk away. And every day since our wedding, I've chosen Jackson, and he's chosen me. And that, more than any mother's blessing or sister's compatibility, is what makes a marriage work.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.